The English language can be very confusing, especially when it comes to pronouncing words. Some silent letters and letters are pronounced differently depending on how they are written. Today we're diving deep into the world of pronunciation, focusing on those tricky past simple verbs ending in ed. Hey there, welcome back to our channel. Now many learners find the ed sounds in English a bit challenging, but fear not. By the end of this video, you'll be pronouncing words like a native speaker. Let's get started. First things first, let's break it down. In English, there are 3 different ed sounds: the T sound, the D sound, and the ed sound. Each one is used based on the preceding sound in the word. So, whether it's hunted, loaded, or created, understanding which ed sound to use is crucial for impeccable pronunciation. Now, a lot of students ask how they can learn which pronunciation is correct. So actually, how do you know how this ending is supposed to sound? The good news is there are patterns or rules for the pronunciation of the ed ending. And I'm going to share those 3 rules with you in this lesson today. The first thing to know is that these ed verbs can be pronounced in 3 different ways. The first way is as id, such as needed or wanted. The second way is with a ought, sounds such as watched or looked or talked. The third way is d, sounds such as called or loved. Be sure to stay with me all the way through the lesson because I'm also going to share 2 key tips on how to make this ending easier to pronounce, and we'll practice it together. Sounds like a plan? All right, let's dive in. Rule number 1, T sound. We'll start with our voiceless consonant sounds. Remember, no vibration with these. After these sounds, the final ed will take on a ET sound. The T sound comes as a surprise to many students. It is a very soft T sound, such as in carrot. The same T sound needs to be made with verbs that end in the following consonants: P, K, F, S, J, Sh, X, and Th. Let's practice together. Repeat after me. Asked, stopped, walked. To ensure you're pronouncing it correctly, try this trick. Hold up a mirror and show that your tongue touches the roof of your mouth when pronouncing the T. So remember, when your root word, or the word that you start with, ends in a voiceless consonant sound, then that ed ending is going to sound like a T. So, the key thing to remember is that the only time the ed ending is going to sound like id is when the word that you start with ends in a T or a D sound. Rule number 2, id sound. Moving on to the second rule of pronouncing the ed ending. The id sound that most students commonly want to use the most is actually only used if the last consonant is a T or a D. Then by adding an ed to the verb, you will make a sound like id. Examples of this would be verbs like needed, wanted, and decided. So remember, the only time that ed is ever going to sound like it is when the word that you start with ends in a T or D. Rule number 3, ed sound. Ready for the third pronunciation of ed? Yes, there's more. Before you panic, let me assure you that this is the easiest category when learning how to pronounce words ending in ed. Here's the rule. When an ed is added to any word that finishes with a T or D sound, that final ed will sound like ed. That's it. Let's try just a few so that you're comfortable with these words. Again, check the video to hear the correct pronunciation. Now, when the base word ends in a voiced sound like B, G, G, M, N, L, R, S, W, V, Z, the ed sound is pronounced as D. The D sound is very easy for students to get used to. Let's try a few more. Grabbed, tagged, lived. One thing to keep in mind is that there are always exceptions to the rule. So when you are learning to pronounce the words, be sure to ask a teacher for help. So there we have our 3 categories of ed pronunciation. First, voiceless sounds are followed by the T sound. Next, voiced sounds are followed by the ed sound. And finally, D, or T, sounds are followed by the ed sound. Now, the best way to learn the correct pronunciations of past simple verbs is to break up the sounds. For example, let's look at the verb watched. So the sounds with the verb watched are wa, ju, h, et. First, Say all the sounds separately and slowly so you can hear them clearly. Then start saying the same word a little more quickly by putting all the sounds together. Keep repeating the word until you have said it in full, using all the correct sounds. Remember, not all past simple verbs end with an och-ide sound, so be sure to practice the pronunciation of these verbs. It will help your spoken English greatly. How does word linking affect the ed sound? Let's try some of these ed words in sentences to see how they link to other words. Read the following paragraph out loud and listen to the reading in the video to compare your pronunciation to the model. Yesterday was a disaster. At the office, I tried out my new coffee mug, but that morning I bumped into my coworker while carrying it and spilled coffee all over her dress. She washed most of it out, but the coffee stained her dress. I tried to help, but she got upset. I used to drink coffee in my old spill-proof mug, and I realized at that moment that I shouldn't have tossed it out. Before we wrap up, let's address some common mistakes learners make. For instance, mispronouncing learned as learnt or played as played. Remember, mastering these ed sounds is about finesse and practice. So there you have it, the 3 rules or patterns for pronouncing that ed ending, as well as 2 key tips for making it easier to pronounce. The first tip, remember, it's only going to sound like ID when the ed comes after a word that ends in T or D. The second tip, use linking to make pronouncing that ed easier by combining sounds between words. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more Ed-sational content, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Keep honing those language skills, and until next time, happy learning.